de estar con nosotros esta mañana y para explicar un poquito, muy en breve, de qué hablamos hoy, de presentar los invitados, los colegas por parte internacional que van a hacer la presentación. Hoy básicamente, muy en breve, hablamos de tres cosas: de redes sociales, de contenidos en edición. De redes sociales y de contenido con Wave. Wave es el estudio de redes sociales más histórico que existe a nivel internacional. Y tenemos aquí el papá de Wave, que es ese señor, perdón, ese señor aquí, que se llama Glen Parker, y que trabaja su Wave desde el 2006. Entonces tenemos un approach histórico que creemos es muy importante cuando hablamos de digital, porque digital muchas veces es lo más interesante, lo más nuevo, la moda de hoy, pero digital es tan potente que tiene una historia, y tenemos que tener en gran cuenta la historia y de contar la historia de las redes sociales. Cuando hablamos de redes sociales y de contenido, necesitamos hablar de medición, porque vale, es un medio, una actividad tan importante que tenemos que compararla con otros medios. Porque ahora la decisión es invertir en tele o invertir en redes sociales. Entonces necesita métricas que se pueden compartir. Entonces tenemos el jefe de la actividad social a nivel internacional de Mediabrands, Vídeo, que va a presentar la metodología y la modalidad de trabajo que tiene Mediabrands para la medición de redes sociales. Y al final, Ana, que va a liderar, por supuesto, la metodología, porque es la jefa de la casa, una mesa redonda para hablar de cómo en España redes sociales y contenidos y medición son tangibles, se pueden tocar. Entonces tenemos a Rash Smith, que es una youtuber con un canal muy de gran éxito, y José Manuel Pacheco, que es el director de contenidos de Antena 3, entonces digitales. Entonces tenemos el otro espectro de la producción de contenido, ¿no? Súper established y grassroots. Esas son las únicas dos palabras de inglés que he dicho. ¿Empezamos?
Hola a todos.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Gianpaolo. Bienvenidos a Wave 8. ¿Quién ha estado antes en Wave 7 y en Wave 6? Yo también. Pues esta vez os voy a dar la bienvenida a Wave 8 y a la bienvenida al lenguaje del contenido. Contenido es hoy en día cualquier cosa casi que consumimos. Es decir, un tweet, una foto que ponéis en WhatsApp, un vídeo, antes de cualquier contenido de una serie o un vídeo en YouTube. Eso es contenido. Hoy en día, prácticamente, cuando navegáis por una página web, la página os está implorando que cliquéis aquí, allí, que queréis más, o incluso cuando tenéis un banner publicitario, un pre-roll, un vídeo enriquecido, ese vídeo os invita a que cliquéis en el botón de Facebook, a que vayáis a conocer más contenidos sobre las marcas. Todo eso es contenido y está a 1 o 2 clics de distancia de vuestro dedo o de vuestro cerebro. Hoy os vamos a presentar nuevamente el estudio más largo y más ancho del mundo de redes sociales. Este estudio es Wave y, como ha dicho Gianpaolo, el papá de la criatura es Glen, al que estoy encantada de tener aquí y recibir. Entiendo que vais a disfrutar un montón con el contenido. Para todos vosotros, cualquiera que quiera a posteriori descargarse la presentación tanto en inglés como en castellano, podéis ir a la web de UM y a partir de ahí podréis descargaros el documento. Y os digo que esta vez, por primera vez, vamos a tener el contenido dividido en 3 partes. Una es descubrir, la siguiente es crear ese contenido y entender las eficiencias de ese contenido, pero sobre todo medir. Medir, sí, como ha dicho Gianpaolo, que está sentado ahí, medir. Y es la primera vez en la historia en la que se lanza y se tiene una herramienta que es capaz de tranquilizar a vuestros directores financieros. Sí, sí. Así que, Glen, muchísimas gracias por venir y espero que disfrutéis mucho.
you, Anna, and Carlo. It's always funny when I come to do these presentations because I don't speak any Spanish, and often I go to countries where I don't speak the language, and I'm sitting there all happily, quite enjoying it, and then someone says my name, and I suddenly think, oh, it must be my turn, but I'm miles away. So, good morning, everybody, and thank you all for coming. Sorry, I've got my battery in my hand, so I'll try and put it in my back pocket. And welcome to Presentation of Wave 8, which we're calling the language of content. Well, I'll first just start with what is Wave. I always forget this. It's interesting to see the show of hands. Whenever I present, I always assume that everybody knows what Wave is, but obviously that's not the case. So, for those of you who don't know, Wave is an online global survey that we've been doing since 2006, so we've been doing it for a long time. All the data is quantitative, so it's all based on self-completion questionnaires. So we create the questionnaires, they go out online, and then people complete them, and then we compile the results. The groups of people that we talk to are people that we call the active internet users. So those are people that are on the internet every day and every other day. And the reason why we talk to those people is because actually they're the kind of, really, if you like, they're the kind of early adopters. Actually, those are the people that, you know, what they do today, everybody else does tomorrow. So we've always kind of learned most by talking to them. So they're the people that drive the adoption of new platforms and services. As you can see here, Wave really does represent the world. It represents something like the attitudes and opinions of, when upweighted, 1.3 billion people around the world. So everything you're going to see is truly representative of what's happening in the online space today. We're in 65 countries, and we talk to something like 50,000 people. And actually, one of the things that I'm really proud of, and one of the reasons why it's great to be here in Madrid today is, as you can see up there, Spain is not just been part of Wave 8, but actually been part of this project from day one. So from back in 2006, Spain has been a fantastic partner for us in terms of this project, and we'll be able to kind of share some of that Spanish data with you this morning. And this is a chart I like to call the Wave story, because this really, hopefully, gives you an understanding of really what Wave is and how we've got to kind of the thinking that we've got to today. So as I said, back in 2006 is when the project started. And way back then, I mean, it doesn't seem like that long ago, but I think in terms of online and in terms of social media, it's a lifetime ago. And what we wanted to do back then was, you know, in 2006, everybody was a social media expert. Everybody thought they knew what was going on online. And if you went online and read, you'd read all of these kind of bloggers and all of these social media experts talking about, you know, the top 10 tips of social media. You know, these are the things that you need to do. But the reality was that when you started to look at those opinions, you started to realise that they weren't based on facts at all. In fact, they were just opinions. Nobody had any real data. So what we decided to do back then was actually just do a small survey across a few countries, and actually ended up being 15 countries across the world in that first one. Started to look at actually was social media living up to the hype? You know, were as many people using it as perhaps we thought? And actually, what it told us was back then was social media was big. There were huge numbers of people engaging online. They were using the social platforms. So what that made us realise was actually this was something that we couldn't just look at once. It's something that we need to continually start to look at. And actually, that's really where Wave was born. So what we've done since then is we've gone back into the market, we've questioned people again every single year since then to kind of mark the evolution of social media. And what we've been able to do because of that is we've actually been able to see how it changed. So we saw in that very first year, from 2006 to 2007, it goes from very much kind of like a text-based medium to a much more audio-visual medium. So platforms like YouTube were growing really quickly back then. Then we looked at influence, because we knew that loads of people were interacting online and loads of people were sharing their opinions, and sites like Amazon were actually enabling people people to give reviews of products, and we wanted to know if it was influential. And we certainly could see that it was very influential. But then in 2010, I think we had really a bit of a revelation, really, because we've been tracking all of this kind of growth, and we've been doing presentations about trends. And actually what we realised was that actually maybe we were kind of missing the point in terms of social media. We weren't really asking the right questions. Because everybody was asking about what was happening. You know, you can remember those stats, those numbers that used to go around. You know, Facebook is the 4th largest country in the world. And actually we were so obsessed with the numbers, we forgot to really ask a more fundamental question, which is, why was social media so big? Why was it growing so fast? And that really, for us, was a real turning point in terms of how we think about social media. Because actually what we found was the motivations were far more interesting than the behaviours. And actually I'll share with you a little bit later what those kind of findings were. It gives us, I think, a really different point of view, but also one, I think, that makes it much easier to start to think, well, actually, how do we use the online space? How do we behave in that space? And how do we use those channels? And then once we really understood what drove consumers, we then started to think, well, what's the relevance for brands? And actually, that's what we've been doing ever since. We've looked at Wave 5, which was the socialisation of brands, which actually said, what kind of relationships does consumers want with brands? And actually, within our data, we can define those relationships. We can understand what consumers are looking for. In the business of social in 2012, what we actually did was we started to connect that with communications objectives. So in other words, we didn't just think about what the consumer wants, we started to think actually about what the brand needs as well, and actually we're able to connect these two things together. We can start to understand what kind of experiences online not only engage the consumer, but also allow us to meet our communication goals, whether that's awareness, whether that's sales, whether that's advocacy, whether that's loyalty or whatever. And then last year, and I'll share some of this a little bit later, we started to just look at everything that we've looked at. We started to look at all those behaviours that we've looked at, all of those trends, all of those things, and start understanding actually what underpins all of that is basic human needs. And I'll share some of that data with you this morning. And that really leads us where we are today in 2014, well 15 now, with Wave 8, the language of content. So what we really wanted to do with Wave 8 was take all of that thinking, all of that way of thinking, and think actually what that means to the world of content, because we all know it's an opportunity, and actually how do we start to use that opportunity? How do we start to create content and place content in a way that actually benefits brands? So that started me thinking. So when we started Wave 8, the language of content, we were trying to understand the value of content. And the first thing you realise is that there's no shortage of content. So here we are as brands and marketeers thinking about how we use content, but actually from a consumer point of view, there's almost too much of it. So when I start to think about all the content that I consume on a daily basis, so I go on the Guardian website, which is the kind of left-leaning liberal newspaper in the UK. I go on the Guardian every day. I go on Engadget because I'm into technology. I use Sky Go. Actually, I was using it on the plane on the way over here, watching TV programs. I'm heavily into gaming, so I've got loads of games on Xbox. I listen to podcasts. So I've already got a lot of content. And then I started to think, actually, when I think about this content, I consume lots of content, but there's loads of content out there that I'd love to consume, but I just don't have time. So I'd love to read more of The Economist. I'd love to read more in Wired magazine and see what's going on. There's movies out there, fantastic movies that I haven't even seen yet, right? There's all those games that I've yet to play. There's podcasts, TED Talks I haven't seen. So when I started thinking about content, I was thinking actually, we're a content overload. no one said, I went online and couldn't find anything to see. No consumer is asking for more content. But what's really interesting is when you think where we live in a world where content is everywhere. Every single thing ever created, any film, TV show, novel, ever created is only a click away online. But even in that context, branded content still works. Content from brands still cuts through. And actually it's increasingly doing so. So we live in a world of content overload. Consumers aren't asking for content, but actually branded content is still working. So the question for us is why? If the consumer's not looking for it, the question for us is, what's the role of branded content? Why is content so compelling to consumers? And what first kind of occurred to me when we were thinking about kind of the whole area of content was, content can almost feel like, when you start thinking about it, as woo-woo. And actually what I mean by woo-woo is woo-woo is actually a term that's used by scientists when people come up with fake theories, or when scientists take, or when people take theories from scientists and then misuse them to kind of explain things and talk about nonsense. Woo-woo means absolute nonsense. And actually content, if you like, could be like that. And here's a great example of what I mean by that.
Yo, bro, you on woo-woo? You kidding me? Everybody's on woo-woo. Woo.
Hello, people.
We're going all in on woo-woo. Hey, Mark,
On the sub profile page. Susie, write us some posts. Grace, upload some videos.
I want sponsored booths. I want targeted booths. We want to be all up in your woo-woo feed.
Gordon, register our woo-woo family.
Don't you know the Wu-Tang Clan?
Let's get them involved. We need an ethnically ambiguous woo-woo mascot.
We're cashing in the Q4 budget, people. And we're buying some followers. Yeah. Woo! 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 Dude, are you still on woo-woo?
Nah, man. My mom's on woo-woo.
And that, for me, is a perfect example of the kind of challenge you have when you're thinking about social media, when you're thinking about content. You can get too excited just by the thing itself, and then get carried away just by the thing itself. And I think that's something that we do in advertising and marketing, particularly. So, I mean, that's why it's really important for us with Wave, is we always think about this from a consumer point of view. Kind of get beyond the hype. So what we started to think about was actually, so what is the role of content? What does content really mean to consumers? And the interesting thing for us when we started to think about this was Wave, if you like, this project that we do, this research project, is almost like an exercise in content creation itself. I mean, one of the things that we've done right from the beginning is we've always shared the studies with everyone. You see, you've got the books here today. We've always published a book. We've always shared our insights. We've always put them online. And actually, to date, in fact, this number's higher now. We've got something like just on one platform alone, 700,000 views. So in other words, there's something about our content that is useful and powerful to those people. And actually, maybe there was some, for us, we were thinking, maybe there was some insights in there, or some clues to how we should start thinking about how powerful content is, or what content means to consumers. So what we then started to do was, we started to look on SlideShare and see what people's comments were about our content. So, and this is actually a very typical kind of content that we got from Fernando, who said, he's a student, he said, this kind of content is great for people like me. He's working on his thesis, he's working on his degree, and actually for him, he can take that data and use that data in his thesis. So it's really kind of useful for him in that level. But then we've got Jesus, who's from Latin America, and actually this is a more, if you like, almost a more typical example of how people are using our content. So what Jesus was saying was, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm looking forward to blogging this on my own blog. And, the insights are great, and I'm looking forward to discussing this with my own blog readership. So what he's actually doing is he's taking the content. He's actually less interested in what the content says. He's more interested in what he can do with that content. He's actually taking the content and using it for himself. So here you're starting to see the content has power and it has useful because people can use that content. And then here's, I've now found out the blogger is called Fairy Mary. I've actually found out Fairy Mary is female. So we presented this in Milan and somebody actually knew who Fairy Mary was. Apparently they're a student in the US. But she said, I'd like to take a copy of this and use the slides in my presentation. So in other words, what you start to see is when you think about why have we had so many views of Wave, it's not because people have been interested necessarily in what it says, although they have been interested in that. What they've been interested in is taking the insights and using them. So if it's for building their own presentation and building their own career, or if it's building their own blog readership and building their own reputation, for them the content has a value beyond just the consumption of it. And that really was a clue for us in terms of how we start to think about it. And what it makes us realise is that content, because it's so, sorry, I'll have to explain this picture before I carry on. This is the design team who designed all the Wave presentations, and I told them I was in Milan, Madrid, and so they drew, that's actually a picture of me as a Spanish bull coming to Madrid. And in fact, they've kind of named this Raging Bullshit, which I think says something about how I present. But what you kind of realise is that there is so much content around that actually we use it as part of our everyday conversation. So actually we use content to communicate with one another. One of the things that's happened is because there is so much content around, we will share that content with other people. And actually it becomes part of the conversation and it becomes part of the language. And that's really why we started to think about content as a language between consumers. We can understand how people use it, but then also understand how people share that content. And this, if you like, really goes to the heart of, really, if you like, what we think within Wave. Really, what, if you like, is our one key thought, is we need to think beyond just the trend. Because if we just follow the trends, just like the woo-woo video, we end up in obsolescence. We just follow the latest fad. We just follow the thing that everyone's excited about. And actually what it is just a pathway to obsolescence. We actually think, if you just follow what the latest trend is, what you'll find yourself is that by the time you get there, it will be out of date. So what we try to do is we try to understand this from a consumer perspective. We try to understand what it means to consumers. And what it really means, and what really underlies all of this, is actually what we call the 5 core needs. So now when we start to think about what role social media plays, and when we start to understand what role content plays, you start to think, actually behind all of those trends, behind all of the reasons why social media has grown so quickly, behind all the reasons why consumers share content, is in order to achieve actually 5 very simple things. And actually this is something you can think about yourself in terms of your own behaviour online. All people are trying to do around the world is they're trying to build relationships. So they might share content to build relationships with each other. They might share content to have fun, to have a diversion. They might share content to progress. So actually that content they might be sharing it with their boss because they want to get on in the world. They might be doing it for recognition. So in other words, they share content so actually they can get respect from their peers. Or they might be doing it to share learning. And actually what is great about thinking about it this way, thinking about these very simple 5 needs, is all of a sudden you demystify the whole world of social. You demystify the whole world of content. Suddenly you don't need to think about the technology so much. Suddenly you don't need to be an expert in all of these things. All you need to understand is what motivates your consumers. Actually, this hits the heart of everything. And this really sits at the heart of the way that we think about the online space, because we believe if you understand which of these motivations your consumers have, you can start to use that as a pathway that leads you away from woo-woo, but actually it will lead to a place where you build a strong relationship with consumers. And also, and this for me is, I know when I've got a great insight, is when it makes sense of the world. That's for me what true insight is. So as a researcher, what I'm always looking for is not necessarily an insight that is something that nobody had ever thought of before, or that is a great revelation. I'm looking for an insight that explains everything, that can explain behaviour. And actually, when we start to think about these 5 needs, we can start to map the world. We can start to understand actually how countries are different, how target audiences are different from one another, in terms of understanding what those needs are. And here, when we look at different markets around the world, when we look at Spain, we see, particularly in terms of their social media, what the kind of need state Spain is. You can see here it sits with Italy and Mexico. It's a relationship market, and actually it's on its way to being a diversion market as well. It's kind of sitting right at the heart, right between that kind of border. And so it starts to explain how the world is different. You can see up here, China is a learning market because it's a place actually where they're using the online space to learn. So it gives us a real kind of fundamentally true insight. And I think the great thing about thinking about those 5 needs in that way is actually when you think about them, they're inherently true, they're fundamentally true. In fact, they've always been true. It's not like we've suddenly got these needs because we have access to online. The reality is we've always had those needs. The only difference is we now have the opportunity to express those needs and meet those needs in many more ways. So that's the opportunity for us, if you like, in terms of content. We can start to think about the needs of our consumers in this way. And so when you start to think about the online space, and particularly in terms of content, and you start to think about it, what are the kind of consumer needs, you start to realise that actually, when we think about sharing, and particularly when we think about sharing content, it's not a simple thing that we do. It's not an automatic thing that we do. Every site now has the opportunity for you to pin a piece of content or share a piece of content almost automatically. So you could be forgiven to think then that if it's so easy and automatic to do, that it's an automatic thing. You just share content without thinking about it. But the reality is we are emotionally invested in content that we share. When we started Wave 8, one of the first questions we asked was how happy you feel when you share something and people respond. And what you can see up here is that, in Spain, 59% of people are really happy when someone makes an interesting comment about that piece of content. 54% say they're really happy when someone shares something that was inspired by something that you said. So in other words, when we share content, we're really emotionally invested in that content. We're looking for a response. We're looking for some kind of recognition from what we're sharing. And the funny thing is about this chart, with the people who were actually helping us design the presentation, when they were designing this chart, they recognised that behaviour in themselves. They recognised that every time they shared something on Facebook, that actually they were looking for a response. And actually it stopped them from sharing for a week or so because they felt actually slightly guilty by the fact that they were wanting this response. But now they've kind of gone back. So that to me shows it's inherently true. When we share something, we are looking for something back. And actually I think that thing that we're looking for back fits within those 5 needs. And then also there's nothing worse than being ignored. So at the same time that we look for recognition when we share something, we also feel really bad when someone deletes a piece of content or ignores a piece of content that we shared with them. Actually I know from my own experience, I have people within my team in London who will delete posts that no one's liked or shared. Oh, there's lots of laughing in the room, so I imagine there's other people who have done the same thing. Because of that, sense of, okay, maybe I'm boring or maybe my post is boring, But obviously that shows how emotionally tied we are to the content that we share, whether it's our own content or whether it's other people's shared content. And this, I think, you start to realise why that's the case. And there's something I think that's really happened in the last few years that has caused a fundamental shift around the world. So here we look at a very simple statement, which is, I would love to become famous online. So if you look at a 16 to 24-year-old, a third of young people, in fact, this number is much higher around the rest of the world, say they would love to be famous online. And then I look at my demographic, the 45 to 54-year-old, it's much lower. So the reality is, I think, for a younger generation growing up, this idea of wanting to be famous online, to creating this online reputation, is now a fundamental need. And actually I think it's something that's purely natural. So I think about those people within my team who are 21, 22, 23, they've always curated an online persona. They've always been building an online reputation using social channels. Whether it's MySpace, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Snapchat, or whatever the new channels are that they've adopting. They've always been curating that online persona. And what I see is actually that naturally then progresses into the workspace. So because they've always been doing it while they're at school, as soon as they come to work, it's a natural thing for them to start doing it at work as well. So a great example of this was we actually launched Wave 8 in London. So as I was launching the presentation, it's an awful lot of work to get it done. You write the presentation, you finally present it, you're exhausted, and just as I'm sitting down, I get an email from LinkedIn congratulating me on being a co-author of the presentation because a 21-year-old in my team had posted up on LinkedIn that she'd been co-author of Wave 8. I mean, she'd already shared it in social channels before I'd even sat down in my seat at the end of the presentation. So it's a natural thing for her to take that content and think about how she can use that content in her career. And actually, when we asked that question about wanting to be famous online, there's only one other group around the world who wants to be more famous online than a 16-year-old, and that's us here in this room, right? So 50%. And again, it's higher in other parts of the world, say actually they want to be famous online. And I think really this starts to demonstrate that the relationship between content and our online reputation are really close, actually, really close. So now when you start to think about the world of content, you start to realise that the reason why, despite the fact that we're surrounded by content and there's no shortage of content, the reason why content is becoming so popular is because actually we're using that content to converse with each other. We're using that content to build relationships with each other, or to learn new things, or to progress in the world. And everyone, in fact, is managing their own content strategy. We're actually thinking about how we use that content and how we can use that content, share that content with other people to kind of meet one of those fundamental human needs. And I think this chart demonstrates that very clearly. One of the questions we asked within Wave was what kind of content you value and what kind of content you would share. And you can see that 12% of people said they valued content that expresses their point of view, but more than twice as many said they would share content that expresses their point of view. So clearly, if we want to make content that's really valuable to consumers, but also content that they will share with others, we need to have content that allows them to express their point of view. In other words, can't just be content that they consume, it must be content that has some kind of social value to them, that can become a social commodity, that actually when they share it, they can benefit from sharing that. And then when we look at sharing across the markets in the main markets across Europe, you can see that actually Italy is one of the largest sharers, but in terms of in Spain, we can see actually that Spain stands out as one of the big digital sharers across the big five in Europe. So that's really why we've called this studying the language of content. What we've tried to do is not think about content as woo-woo, but think about what content actually means. What does content really mean to people? And actually what you realise is that we now live in a reputation economy. Actually what you realise is that the relationship between our online personas and our online reputation and our success in life are actually intimately connected. In fact, there was a great study done in Japan where they took two groups of individuals, and the first thing they did was they played card games with these individuals, and they monitored their brains. So they put little electrodes into their brains, and they monitored the activity. And whenever they won some money, they checked the activity. What they did the next day with the same group of people is they played another card game. But instead, on this card game, they were shown pictures of themselves, and written at the bottom was a word describing them. And each person was told that that word was written by someone that had seen their picture and then written a one-word description of who they thought they were. And what they found was really interesting was that you saw exactly the same brainwave pattern when someone won money versus someone who saw a picture of themselves with a positive comment written at the bottom. So in other words, financial success, reputation success, they're intimately connected. They feel the same to us. And actually, when you start to look at how people behave online, you start to realise that they are intimately connected. We're in a reputation economy. We're actually building our reputations online. We see it as a key part of our success in life, as much as financial successes. So that's why we think about content as a language. We realise as content's being shared because we want to say something to someone around us, that we want to achieve one of those 5 needs. So we can understand which of those needs we want to achieve. We can start to create content and place content in those places that allows people to meet those needs. And we think it will make content much more powerful, but also inherently more shareable. Here I want to show you an example of what happens when content becomes not just something that's used, but becomes a social commodity. So here was some work we did for Coca-Cola for the launch of the Coke Zero brand. And actually, as part of this exercise, we had a partnership with Skyfall, the Bond video. And actually, one of our kind of creative thinking, if you like, around this idea was, one of the things that we know, Coke Zero is aimed at men, and one of the things that we know about men is they all want to be like James Bond. So this is the piece of content we created. But the amazing thing, I think, about that video is it's great fun, but what was amazing was how many views it had. So you can imagine that piece of content was up against all the content created by the film studio. You can imagine how much content the Bond film created. But in its first week, that movie's got more views online in 1 week than the official Bond trailer did in 6 months. And that, for me, if you like, starts to explain that thing that all of the official content was out there. It was on the TV networks. It was on the film review programs. It was everywhere. Everyone had seen that content. It had no social value. Sharing that content had no social value. Whereas this was something entirely new. This was something that other people hadn't seen. So that's why it amassed so many more shares, because it had more. It was a much stronger social commodity than all the official trailers put together. So alongside this idea of our reputational economy, what we're also seeing is our use of social media is changing as well. So actually what it means is we're becoming much more purposeful in terms of how we use social media. And social media way back in time used to be just for fun, but actually now we're using social media in a more meaningful way to actually achieve our personal goals. One of the things that we see around the world, for example, is huge growth in people's perception of social media as a place to make money. And actually, this isn't something that we see so much in Spain, but it's we see huge growth from 18% to 24% in the numbers of people that say social networks are a good place to make money. So in other words, our kind of social persona online and the way we're using social media and tied to financial success and social success, they're intimately connected. We're becoming much more sophisticated in the way that we use these tools to help us progress. As you see, we haven't seen that huge rise in Spain, but we certainly see it around the rest of the world. And here's another great example, I think, of something that really, if you like, demonstrates everything that I've been talking about here this morning. This idea that content becomes really powerful when it helps consumers meet a personal need. So in this case, it was some work that we did for a client we had called Xbox. And actually one of the challenges Xbox had was when they launched the console, they launched it as a TV platform first and a gaming platform second. And actually what happened was that alienated a lot of the gamers. Gamers suddenly thought, well, is Xbox not for me anymore? Actually, is Xbox for someone else? So actually what we wanted to do was turn that on its head and actually demonstrate to the core gamer that Xbox still was the place for core games. And when we looked at the Wave data, what it told us was that actually the one thing that gamers crave the most is respect. And the one group of people that they crave respect from the most is other gamers. So gamers respect gamers. So what we did was we wanted to create a piece of content that actually enabled them to do that. And this is how we did it.
Xbox on to a new generation. When it came to entertainment,
Xbox put Star Trek into darkness.
altogether in one. The all-in-one Xbox One.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're nominated for 4 awards for that piece of work. But what was really interesting about it was we took a traditional TV ad and then we just inserted that tiny little glitch into it. And the great thing about it was it communicated to gamers in a place where gamers thought they weren't being communicated to. And as soon as they kind of recorded it and started to download it, you could see they started to share their comments about it. And then they started to try and crack the code. And then when they did, the first thing they did was when they cracked the code, it wasn't to then follow the next clue, it was to tell everyone that they cracked it. And then that was the kind of key thing for them, was just how clever they were doing. You know, I think we generated something like 1.7 million impressions, no media cost, all kind of just using traditional television in a really kind of interesting way. And all it was just by using that one single compelling insight, gamers respect gamers, and it turned the way that we used media on its head. And then the last thing I'd really like to talk about really with the language content is something I think everybody here in this room recognises, everybody in this room knows, but it's something that is so fundamentally true, I feel like I still have to say it, and that when we think about content, when we think about the language of content, it has smartphone at its heart. I mean, one of the reasons why I say that is, when we think about these 5 needs, this is something I spoke about last year when we talked about those kind of human needs. When we talk about those 5 human needs, those 5 human needs are now intimately connected with online. So when we think of a hierarchy of needs, things like safety and love and self-esteem, access to the internet is now intimately connected with those needs as well. And I think this is something that we all recognise in ourselves. I don't know how many people asked for the Wi-Fi code when you came here today, or how many people asked for the Wi-Fi code whenever you start a meeting. I certainly know that you can never start a meeting until everyone's connected into Wi-Fi, because it's now such a fundamental need for us. So actually, access to online now sits at the heart of, if you like, those 5 human needs that I spoke about earlier. But actually now, when you think about those 5 needs, in order to access online, having a full battery plays a fundamental part of that as well. It sits right at the heart of those 5 needs. I'll give you that just to take a picture of that one, because it makes me laugh as well, that one. But the reason why we say that is it's not just that we feel inherently it's true ourselves. When we start to look at our data in Spain and we look at the growth of devices between this year and last year, you can see that the tablet in yellow has grown very quickly. But I think what is more interesting is when we look at smartphone. We see that smartphone has the highest penetration of any device, higher than the desktop, higher than the laptop, higher than anything else. And actually this is true wherever we look in the world now. So now, if you like, for the first time in our study, the smartphone has always been growing fast, has always been important, but actually now it's become the device with the highest penetration of any of those other devices. It's our primary device. So that means when we think about the language of content, we need to think about the smartphone right at the heart of that. And the reason why we need to think about it that way is content consumption is moving in only one direction. So here where we look at how people are looking at videos online in Spain, and we see how that's changed from Wave 7 to Wave 8, you can see that actually it's going much more towards the tablet and smartphone than it did last year. And actually, when you look around the world, you see it's almost totally migrating towards the smartphone and tablet. And I think we know this in ourselves as well. The way that we consume content is much more on our phones now than it is on our standard devices. And here's an example. I mean, this will be an app that nobody will have heard of here, but it's just one of many new apps that are being created that actually allow you to take content and use that content as a way to communicate with one another. So in the case of Dubsmash, you can take very famous quotes from movies and actually act them out with your own piece of content to send messages to one another. So here you are taking a piece of content, changing that piece of content and using it to share with other people to actually say something. So it's an example of how content, communication and the smartphone is coming together. So in short, so if you like content, and the kind of key thing that I'd like you to take away from this is that content is now used as a shorthand way of us communicating with each other. There's now so much content around that it's naturally become part of our conversation. And as it's become part of our conversation, we've started to use it to communicate with one another. And what we're able to do within Wave is actually look at the different types of content. So there's a lot more data within the survey than I could ever share with you within this presentation. But what we're able to do is look at, within different categories, for different target audiences, what kind of content people want. So whether they want inspirational content, or whether they want content that teaches them something new, or helps them build relationships with other people. And what we're also able to do is understand what the value of that content is. So what we're able to see, for example, is that, for example, around a charity or cause, the reason why people would share that content is because actually they want to earn respect, or they want to change other people's opinions. And that's important. If we're creating content around a charity, what you have to realise is not only do they want to recruit new people to that charity, but they're also doing it because they want to be seen to be part of that charity. They want to earn other people's respect. And we're able to look at all the different types of content in that way and decode it by thinking about it as communication. And I think actually you will have all seen the Ice Bucket Challenge, which is the charity where you threw the cold bucket of water over your head and then you challenged the next person to do it, and at the same time you donated. And I think for me this is a perfect example of that idea of those 5 needs coming together with a smartphone to delivering a really kind of strong shared content strategy. So in other words, what it did was understand that actually when people were engaged in a charity, they weren't just doing it to promote that cause, they were also doing it to earn respect. What it also did was it used the smartphone in a very natural way. The smartphone was used to record that content. Also because the smartphone is so great at sharing content, it could also seamlessly share that content, and that chain continues. And this for me is a great example of everything that I've talked about here, about how if you think about content as a language, how you can create something really compelling, but also something really huge. So that, I'll come back a little bit later just to kind of summarise on some of the other ways that we can use Wave. But I think one of the big things that we've done this year is what we started to do is not just think about how to create content, but also how to measure content, and actually how we start to connect our tools together and our thinking together. And Eric and I have done a lot of work this year in terms of connecting Wave as a strategic planning piece to how we then turn that into something that can then measure and optimise going forward. So Eric, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Buenos días, ¿cómo están? Lo siento, mi español es muy malo, mucho malo. So I'm going to speak in English because my Spanish is so bad. But thank you all for coming, and thank you, Glenn, for the introduction. We have this amazing insight, this amazing data that we've received from Wave, and then we can create this beautiful content. But how do we close the loop? How do we measure the performance of that content in social media? And I've spoken at many different events, and I've heard people talk about social media ROI, and social media is so special. But when they go to the CFO and they ask for money, and the CFO says, "What's my ROI?" the social person says, "I don't know, but trust me, this is important." And so for the last several years, the CFO says, "Okay, fine." But this year they've stopped. This year they need ROI, they need metrics. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Our clients have
three major issues that they are facing. The first one is there's too much content. As Glen pointed out, you can find any kind of content imaginable online, and because of this, there's just too much. On Facebook, typically, this data is from Facebook, every time you refresh your newsfeed, there are an average of 1,500 new stories. Well, this is ridiculous. Who's going to scroll through 1,500 stories? No one has time for this. So the more content that's produced, the more stories each refreshed, and the less likely people are to see your content. These are the numbers for 5 of our clients. You can see we have beverage, gaming, chemicals, insurance, and software. And the gaming company has about 9% visibility. The chemical company has about 1%, not a surprise. But what this means is that on average, 95% of your fans are not seeing your content today because there's just too much. I'm not even talking about the world, just your fans who have clicked yes to the brand. So this is a huge problem if you are investing in content. The second problem that we see is that paid social spend is now a requirement. You must pay money to get seen and to break through this barrier. So this is an example of a tire manufacturer. You can see they have 5 posts. One is a lifestyle post. They changed their cover photo. They have isn't this strange kind of post. And the numbers are, como se dice, pathetic, awful, terrible, and no one has seen this organic content. Now, when we pay €1,000, just €1,000, this is what happens. Look at that. From 2,800 at the top to 900,000. So this is because Facebook, is Facebook here today? Facebook is like a really good drug dealer. Facebook wants you, you pay a little bit, they give you way too much reach on purpose so that you're hooked. And this is their business model, etc. But this is why we must now do this, and just €1,000 results in that much reach. Reach is important, it's required, because that's the only way we can get to the good stuff, which is engagement. Anyone can see a social ad, but to click on it, to like it, to share it, that's when we create consumer touch points that are found in search. That's when we know that their brain is interactive with our content. That's what we want to achieve, and the only way to get there is to have reach. In the past, I used to work for a social media agency, and it was about join the conversation, join the dialogue, join our community. It was about adding fans, and I want 1 million fans by the end of the year. I used to have clients tell me this. And it was about building communities and trust, and ROI was not important. 2012, we saw some content, really important content, create results, big numbers. Oreo Mondelez, Oreo cookies had ridiculous reach through the use of content. Content's very expensive, as you can see. We went to the CFO, we asked for money for a content budget, and the CFO said, what's my ROI? And we said, we still don't know. And the CFO turned away, turned a blind eye, etc. Well, not anymore. As of last year, when Facebook changed the algorithm and organic reach crashed almost to 0, to 5%, now we go back and say, we need an ad budget, a paid media budget for social. And the CFO says, no, not going to happen. So what do? This makes a lot of our clients feel stuck. The third and final issue is that there are no metrics around social that are about money. So I have clients tell me, I have lots of likes, I have lots of retweets, but what does that mean? How is that important? Or they say, I don't know what's working in social, I don't know what's not working. I spoke to the head of Patron Tequila, the head of digital, and he said, we don't have the data, we don't know what kind of tools, we don't know what kind of people we should hire, we just don't have any kind of information about social. Are we doing good, are we doing bad? We don't know. So this is a problem. All these clients are feeling stuck. They need money to achieve reach. They need metrics to achieve the money. And yet they only have likes, shares, and retweets. And so we go to the CFO. Por favor, señor. Por publicidad. Sorry, lo siento. And you can see that he or she says no. So this is a problem. This is such a problem now that half of companies, our clients, have stopped trying to measure social media ROI. They just stopped. It's too hard. I used to work for a PR company, and I would put together an Excel spreadsheet, huge Excel spreadsheets, and I would say, a like is worth €1 on a Wednesday, but on a Friday it's worth €1.50, whatever. And then on Instagram, it's this. It was so questionable. I would go to the CFO and I would say, please, sir, please, ma'am, please, let me show you my beautiful spreadsheet and you'll see the ROI. It's ridiculous. So this is really such a problem. It's so difficult and challenging for so many clients that have given up. So we see at IPG with social, we believe, we know it's important, we know it works, we know that we have to be a social brand, but how do I justify my efforts? I have had clients say, I don't even know if this is worthwhile anymore. And I'm just like, oh my God. Yes, it's worthwhile. And we hear this a lot. I was one of the cool kids. I was a social person. We had parties, we had sangria, and now it's just one more paid media channel, right? One more paid channel, boring paid channel on television and radio and whatever. So, rather than doing this, these spreadsheets and this crazy convoluted metrics, we believe there is an easier way that can be automated, and that is to look at earned media value. Now, earned media value is what would I have to pay to achieve the same results with paid media. So I want my fans to like and share and tweet and retweet and create these touch points in social media without paying for it. We want them to do it on their own. So when we do that, they're almost like a marketing army. They're marketing for us. McKinsey did a study that showed that 66% of all touch points created online are generated by consumers, not by marketers. So if there's that many touch points being created everywhere about your brand, and they're found in search, then I better influence those fans. I'm so sorry. I'm trying. So we have a solution that we're very excited about called Performly. Performly is a tool that we developed in conjunction with Unilever in Latin America. Unilever has many different brands for laundry, for beauty products, for food and beverage, etc. And they have many Facebook pages and many Twitter accounts and YouTube channels all across the continent. So we helped them build this, and this is basically a tool that measures that earned media value. It reaches in through, I'll show you. This is the most complex I will get today, I promise. We use a data connection to Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We pull all the data from those channels automatically. We look at shares, and photo posts, and video posts, etc. And then we price them based on whatever that client is paying for the same thing. I went to a conference, a big advertising conference in New York last year, and in the conference, the thought leader said, a share is worth €1 everywhere for every company. And I'm like, okay, on your planet, that might be true. But our clients only care about what they pay for media, so that's what we should measure, right? So we gather all the media in one place, we price every single tweet, like, share, fave, comment, etc. We look at it compared to benchmarks, so we can tell if are we doing better than last month, or are we doing worse? And then the tool has automated feedback, like you're doing a great job, or you really need to improve your engagement, etc. And then it produces this beautiful dashboard which shows you how your social is performing. So here's an example, and Glen was talking about what the consumer likes and values and what the consumer shares. And this is one of the automated features of Performly. Here is a tweet from Chrysler Brazil, and you can see that they are comparing a bird of the Amazon to a Dodge truck. Why they would compare a bird to a truck, I don't know, but they had 11 likes. And so Performly sees this and it says, low engagement, low fan acquisition, you maybe earn 16 euros maximum from this post. Here's your typical cute puppy. Aw, he's so cute. He gets an aw, everyone likes it, but they click like. That's it. There's no engagement, no discussion, no big deal. So we're getting better, but we still have a long way to go. This is, we call it an easy like. It's a throwaway, it's meaningless. So the content team at Etsy, you're doing okay. Performly might say that's worth 200 euros. So this was very controversial advertisement for 9 West shoes. And it said, if you're looking for Mr. Right or Mr. Right Now, we have a shoe for that. So you can start husband hunting. Well, many women took a lot of offense at that. Half of them loved the shoe, and the other half hated the ad. So of them both. So this generated a tremendous amount of engagement, but it also, and it generated likes, but it also generated a lot of unlikes of the brand. So we started to see the fan base shrink because of this one post. So the engagement was good, right? We're great touch points, but a lot of negativity too. So Facebook or Performly says that's better, but that's not the best. And you can see here, this is a post for British Airways. They asked, what is the name of this plane, do you know? And we've been flying for the UK since 1915. So it's a chance, as Glenn was saying, to show off your knowledge, to get some recognition, to get some emotional validation for your brain, and to talk about your British Airways experience, etc. Excuse me, so you can see here, lots of likes, lots of engagements, lots of shares. Facebook value, or why do I keep doing this, Roland? Performly valued this at about 7,800 euros for this one post of earned media value. So this is the thing that kind of thing that Performly does. And so this is now a new kind of conversation for the CFO. I would like 10,000 euro, please, to promote this post. Performly says, we have 12,000 new fans just from this one post. Well done. And we then measure, the system measures how much touch points and earned media, both the new fans generated about that post and the existing fans. And then now I can go back to the CFO and say, thank you very much. For the 10,000, we have generated 47,000 of marketing impact. And those are real numbers from Chrysler, but not Chrysler Brazil. So you can see here, we start entering our paid media prices into the database. This is for every country, every fan page, every Twitter account, every YouTube channel. And the system starts to spit out these numbers. So you can see here, this is Azucarera, is that pronounced right? Close enough. And you can see the top 10 videos on YouTube. And we have many of the Cupcake Maniacs commercials posted. And you can see there, the earned media value has been measured based on the number of plays, number of likes, number of comments, shares, favorites, and how many new fans that video generated. So the top video generated 62,000 euro of earned media value, and altogether, total, you can see in the corner, 380,000 euro of earned media value for those 10 videos only. So this is a really good way to tell. If you're a content team, you can say, wow, Cupcake Maniacs Quattro really was amazing. And so we have to, let's use that model and recreate it. So imagine this, for the first time ever, we can put a price on every single thing that we do in social media. This is, has not been done before. Just to give you an example of the impact, this is the CEO of T-Mobile, mobile telephone company, John Laguerre. John says crazy things, outrageous things. He says the competitors are stupid. He says they don't care about you. He'll say whatever he thinks as the CEO of a huge company, and no one else is brave enough to do that. So T-Mobile has about 500,000 fans, but John has 1.2 million fans. A lot of people like to follow him and see what he says. Now, if we look at the 6 months of him tweeting, just him, just Twitter, 8.6 million euro of impact. That's how many people retweet and like and share and talk about him. They generate so much touch points online about John that it's worth about 8.6. And T-Mobile, their Twitter account generated about 17. So when we look at the overall budget for T-Mobile, these are big numbers. This is free marketing that consumers are doing on behalf of the brand because it resonates, the content and the engagement resonates with the consumer. So another thing I hear people talk about a lot is the idea of agile content creation, creating new content every day. And what's great about what we can do now is we can listen to listening software, monitoring software, and Performly, and we can say every day, okay, let's create a content strategy for today. The content people will design a beautiful post or video, publish it on social channels for the company. The community managers will engage with the fans about this content, and talk about it, and the fans will amplify it, they'll share it, they'll retweet and like. And then we can look at the paid and the owned and the earned mix, and we can pull the lever, and we can get people, we can change things every day to get it the most optimal. We've never been able to do this before. Everyone talks about it, we've never been able to do this. And finally, my last point is that I used to help my clients' social teams in their budgeting meeting. I get asked this a lot. And they would say, they would go to the budget meeting and there's direct mail, events, PR, radio, TV, etc. And then social would show up and not have any numbers. And so everyone would get their money for the year and the social team would get just a little bit left over. Finally, the social team can go to the budget meeting with cold, hard cash. So that's my new baby, Performly. Very excited about it. We're seeing a lot of interest from people to be able to finally measure these kind of things. So it's really the full circle: have the insight, create the content, and see how it's doing. So that.
The one thing that Performly's done for us is really kind of complete the circle. We've always been able to kind of generate consumer insights and build creativity and think about how we deliver it, but I think Performly is the thing that really closes the loop in terms of understanding what it is, because unless we measure it, you can't optimize going forward. So really just to summarise everything that I've spoken about with Wave 8 is really we think we can do more with content, but really by thinking about it very differently. We can look at what kind of content works for your individual category. As I say, we can't share all that data with you today, but please reach out to Anna and Christina and Ferran if you want more detail on the target audience or your category. We're also able to start building these maps that can map objective to content, so we can understand the kind of content that the consumer values. We can also understand the kind of content that drives, say, involvement or awareness or loyalty or sales. So we can start to look at this combination of valuable to the consumer, but also valuable to the brand, valuable in terms of what we want to achieve as a communication objective. So in summary, I think what we'd really like to take away from this morning is think about those kind of 5 very fundamental human needs. We think they sit at the heart of all social behaviour, and actually they sit at the heart of all of us. And by thinking about those, actually what we can do is stop thinking about the technology, stop thinking about the woo-woo, the latest trend. We can actually start thinking about people. And if we start thinking about people, then we build strategies that are built for 10 years, not for the next 6 months. The other thing is think about this idea of the language of content. Think about not just what the content means as a form of consumption, but what it would mean as a social commodity. How can we create content that has real value to that consumer? How can we create content that allows you to share something and meet one of those human needs? And then lastly, as Eric has hopefully really shown very clearly and very powerfully, measurement and optimization is obviously a very key part of any kind of content strategy, and we really believe Performly is a really powerful way to think about doing that. So